should you release music on a label? This is going to be a very fireside chat style video. I'm driving right now, heading to Oceanside, California, and there's a lot of things I really wish I knew when it comes to the music industry, which is why I do all these videos. And I'm really going to go in depth about this because I'd say in most cases no, to give you a short answer. In some cases, yes, for sure. But in a lot of cases, no. And the reason why is this. A lot of things have changed, and it's never been easier to be independent. Back in the day, you kind of had to go through a record label. Kind of jumping right into it comes the long answer now. Record labels would pay for studio time, equipment, physical distribution. You're talking about cassettes and CDs or records or any type of medium. Now, though, everything's digital. It's a lot easier. And then when you look at companies like DistroKid, CD Baby, TuneCore, Ditto, etc., it's super easy to release music. DistroKid costs $23 a year for unlimited uploads. It is super cheap to release music now, and a lot better and a lot easier. So the big thing is you don't need the logistical aspects of a label the way you used to. And this makes it a big question for a lot of people. I say is, look, is it even worth it to release on a label? Honestly, in most cases, no. Back in the day, you're like, shoot, I can't print CDs myself or create the cassettes myself. The label did it for me. Now it's like, well, they're pretty much just downloads, right? Or streams. The big thing, though, for me, and this I say to a lot of people, which is, it gets very, very touchy upon the subject, is two main things. The first is going to be, I'd say, what the label is really going to do for you. And two is the cut, right? Now, one of my favorite quotes in business, this is used a lot in like entrepreneurship and everything, is that half of a grape is smaller than a quarter of a watermelon. That's a really good thing to keep in mind. What that means is, look, even though, like, say, if you think about it, you have half of something, half of a small thing is significantly smaller than a quarter of another thing. And when it comes to labels, the number one thing I want to ask yourself when it comes to releasing is this label big enough, or I'm going to be honest to say it in one word, does it have the marketing to get my music out there to create a better ROI? I've had labels reach out to me saying, hey, Mark, I love your music. I want to release your music and everything. And then I look and I'm like, wait a minute. I have a bigger following than they do. I have a bigger following. I don't mean this in like one of those like influencer, like, oh, I don't mean it like that. But just in general, I'm like, the only reason why I release on a label is because they have a bigger following than I do. And they're able to market through different distribution platforms. And by distribution, I don't necessarily mean like Spotify, Amazon. I mean that they're able to send it to maybe magazines or blogs, or they have connections that I don't that optimize it, right? And like I said, that's a big thing to remember, that back in the day, you kind of had to go through a label for marketing, but also the logistical aspect of releasing music and distributing it. Now that logistical aspect is gone. And so when it comes to releasing on a label, this is why I've not done so yet. Maybe at some point I will. And if a big opportunity arises, like let's say I could release on like Ausla. I don't think Skrillex is actually really doing too much with Ausla anymore, at least as I know of. But like if let's say I could release on Ausla or Mad Decent, which is Diplo's label, or Ding Mach, which is Steve Aoki's label, 100% would, because their following is so big. I know that even if they said, using that grape watermelon analogy, let's say they said, hey Mark, I'm sorry, we're gonna take 75% of your earnings off this record or off the song, off streams and downloads. You get 25%. The reason why is we're going to market it, send it out. I'm like, you know what? No issue. One, I now have connections. I'm making connections with Matt Decent. I can say I released on Matt Decent or Dimmock, etc. But two, that 25% is probably going to pay way more than the 100% of me releasing it myself. Now, one thing I want to say, though, and this is where things get very, very interesting. This is why this is actually a more complicated question than you think, is the ultimate ROI. Because let's say I'm like, okay, I know some musicians say this, and I've done this, like I'm saying now. Well, sometimes it is worth it for me to release it myself. I keep 100% of the profits, streams, downloads, everything. I have the rights to everything. I can use it on YouTube and not worry about content ID in case the label decides to do that. Like, there's all these like little things. But if I have a label that markets it in the right way, like say they take, and I'm making this up, 100% of my song's earnings. Let's say I go to release through like a big, let's say Sony, which is, and we can get into some like drama with some of these labels. Let's say Sony wants to release a Futura record. And they say, hey Mark, we're sorry, but like given our name and how big we are and how much we can distribute, we're going to unfortunately have to take 100% of your earnings. You're going to get nothing. You get nothing. like Willy Wonka, you get nothing from releasing with us. To me, I think that would be worth it, honestly, because my name could potentially get so big, as long as it's not a 360-degree deal, which I'll talk about in a second, and it's just through streams and downloads on that one particular record, it's worth it to get the publicity. It's almost like, in a sense, me releasing that song through Sony, it's almost like me paying for marketing through the creative medium that I'm releasing it on a label, right? So these are all different things to consider. Is what is the ultimate ROI, right? Getting your name out there, which could equal more money, more tour dates, etc. Here's where things just get very odd, though, I'm not going to lie. Is in this day and age, which is still kind of wild, given the fact that it's so easy to release independently now. As we all know, and I could go into the nitty-gritty, but as we all know, record labels have atrocious contracts. Even now, which is still crazy to say, we've probably all heard stories of big companies like Ultra or Spinnin' in the EDM world, for example. Sony's another big one, that like someone will release an album with them and they don't see their earnings for years. Or another thing that happens, I've heard of, and this happens to a lot of EDM artists I know, because I've just seen this being a part of the industry. They'll release an EP, like a 3-track EP on this label, and the label says, okay, we're going to release it soon. They're like, oh, sweet. And then a year goes by, and they're like, hey, when's my EP going to be released? And they're like, I was still trying to figure it out. And because they signed a contract, they can't release it themselves because they signed a contract. And they're just kind of sitting there waiting for their own creative work to be released. That's another big issue with releasing on a label. And this is why I suggest, as a side note, I know it's tough because obviously a lot of my videos are geared towards typically beginning/intermediate producers, I feel like. Because I find, that's, at least for me, I do all these videos talking about things I wish I knew earlier. And it's tough because one thing I would say to a lot of musicians is if you can, have a contract lawyer read a contract. And of course, even if you don't know anything about contract lawyer stuff or whatever, or at least read the contract on your own, right? I've almost done brand deals for tens of thousands of dollars that I said no to because I read the contract and said no to it. And God forbid if I signed it thinking it was cool, I could have been screwed, right? And this is true for labels, and I know it's tough because you're like, well, Mark, I'm a beginning musician. This label wants to sign me. I don't have money. Like, contract lawyers can charge a lot of money. Probably not surprising in terms of like reading it and everything. But I'm not gonna lie. I think in this day and age, the big thing I would focus on if I was in like someone's shoes and they're considering a label or not is, one, release it on your own, right? Start releasing on your own. Two, focus on marketing. I've said this before. It kind of stinks to say that now 75% of a lot of musicians, I'd say 90% of musicians who really blow up do so because they market it on social media. They're making viral videos. They're going viral on TikTok. They're creating trends. They're very active on social media with their fans. And we've probably all seen this. So there's been songs that I wouldn't say, I'm not trying to bash anybody, that aren't necessarily the craziest, most mind-blowingly produced songs, but the artist is so smart and genius at marketing them that they just blow up. People find out about them. Next thing they know, they're on a festival lineup, a label lineup. They get a manager, an agent, etc., etc. So the second thing I'd say is focus on marketing. Just get your name out there, make good music, release it yourself, market it. The third thing, and this is where things get, I think, a lot better, is releasing on the label in terms of how the outreach works. Probably not surprising to anybody. If you contact a label, there's way less likely of a chance for them to release you than if they contact you, right? If they contact you, you're almost guaranteed that they're going to accept your next record potentially. They still have to review it. It's kind of like acting, right? If you go to an audition, it's a lot harder than, like, say, if an acting company or like casting company, goes to you and says, hey, we've heard about you. You actually have the look we're looking for. Please, we'd love to schedule an audition with you, just for that pure fact, right? And this can be huge leg up. And that's why I say if you get the marketing in place and do it a lot yourself, this can be huge, in terms of like outreaching, in terms of not having to constantly reach out to them. Because there is something I've noticed throughout the years. I'm going to call it like the label paradox. And that is this. Labels always say, oh, we want new, unreleased music. Like I remember seeing this for a few different labels have said this, and I do like the phrase, but it brings up a very interesting point. And a few labels have said, and I've seen this, if you've heard it here before, don't send us it. If it's something we haven't heard before, released before, please send us it. Concept being, we want to hear unique stuff. Nothing wrong with that. I encourage it. I think that's awesome. But there is a whole commercial aspect to it. And I've noticed this, and I know a lot of other DJs and musicians have talked about this, that you'll go and send a song to a label, and they'll be like, sorry, you know what, this one's cool, but like it's a bit too out there for us, you know, or they might say, sorry, it's just not like what we're really going for, like we just want something that's a bit more unique, for example, or whatever. They'll say some cookie cutter thing, and then their next release will be the most cookie cutter thing, and it's kind of hypocritical. Like they'll say, hey, sorry, this track that you have is like too weird. But then they'll release something even weirder than that, but with a bigger artist name. And that's a big thing, is the artist name, and that's what's kind of tough. Is remember, although yes, labels are designed to push your tracks forward and get them heard, like I said, the biggest thing is marketing. That's the number one word that's going to be a very recurring theme throughout this video, is marketing. At the same time, they're businesses too. They want to make money. And a lot of labels understand that there is kind of a fine but delicate line of releasing unique stuff, but if it's too weird under a no-name artist, it's not going to do well. And like I say, if it's a big artist, whether it's too weird or too mainstream, that artist has that name, right? And it's kind of annoying that labels say, sorry, you know, I've sent labels some stuff before, being honest, that I want to release under, just as like, hey, shoot your shot. And they said, hey, Mark, sorry, like we want something more unique. And then, like I said, they'll then post the next day the most cookie cutter song, and I'm like, but it's a big artist name, right? And this is like a whole issue that comes into releasing with labels. And that's what I say to a lot of musicians. I know that releasing on a label is a big deal, and don't get me wrong. And I know some musicians and DJs have said, look, it's the best thing I ever did. I released my track on a label. I'm so happy I did, because the label distributed it out everywhere and blah, 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 blah. And because of their marketing, I was able to get heard more. And I think there is something to be said about that. But I also think there's something to be said that it's never been better to release your own music. And that's why I say to a lot of musicians, release it yourself, because the second you start trying to release on a label, you're 99.99999% of the time, I might even say 100% of the time, going to have to sign a contract. And there's been times where labels said, hey Mark, I love your song, we want to sign it, and I said no, and I'm so happy I did, because my song would have been locked up in some legal bind that would have been a nightmare to get out of. I would have probably had to get a lawyer, or maybe not, but even if I didn't, it would have taken like a year or two. Just not the position you want to be in, you know? And I think, like I said, at the end of the day, if let's say you do want to release on a label, my best advice, honestly, is to not actually start with a label. This is something I've learned from, I think, Zen World. I think was the first person I heard talk about this. Let's send out promo emails. Contact musicians that you really like and just say, hey, like, here's my new demo. I think it'd be very useful for your sets. I just really hope you check it out. I think it'd be useful if you're doing a house set or whatever, right? You could give them like a mini pitch. Don't make it too long. But the reason why I think that's good is because once artists maybe start using your music, that can actually be a cool little, like, I don't know if you use the word loophole, or like shortcut, I guess is maybe a better phrase, bit of a shortcut to then have labels start noticing you and then reaching out to you. Once that happens, I think you can be in a way better position, you know, especially once labels start reaching out to you. But for me, I'm at the point now in my career where I feel like I've done decently independent, you know, I've decent independently made myself, at least, I don't know, kind of made some waves in the music world with like some of my songs, like St. Patrick's Day being one of them, probably my most famous song. Somehow that one blew up. And I'm really glad they never released on a label, to be honest. But there is a point where I think it is worth it, and like I said, it all comes down to marketing. Like I said earlier in this video, I think there is something to be said about, like, do they have a bigger following than you? How many, and this is a big thing I do, like, let's say a label wants to release one of my tracks, I go on their SoundCloud, and if I see that their average release has 100 views on SoundCloud, 100 views on YouTube, mass streams on Spotify, like, I'm like, why would I give up so many rights and everything to my song when I can even market my song better than they can? And that to me is the whole point of releasing on a label. You know, a lot of things I have to consider, but the biggest thing I'd say is this. If you are looking to release on a label, the number one word I think over and over again is marketing. Can that label, even if they take a bigger cut of your earnings, like I said earlier, can that label market your song and your release, your album, whatever it is, better than you can?